Hello, I'm Carrie from Simple Bird Studio. We're here today to work on block number 2 of Peggy's puzzle. Last time we met, we worked on block number 1 where you learned how to do stems, circles, and stitching, and I hope you had a good time doing that block. On block number 2, we are learning how to do points, curves, and we're going to learn how to do some layering. So I'm going to start right from the beginning. When I have a pattern, I want to trace my pieces onto freezer paper. But with this kind of method that I use, I have to flip my pattern over and trace from the wrong side. So I'll turn my light box on. And I'm just going to trace a few pieces. So I'm going to trace my freezer paper templates on the wrong side of the pattern. The reason I do that is because I need my templates to be reverse images of what the finished product is going to look like. So the easiest way to do this is just to flip your pattern over and trace it from the wrong side. Okay, so with this method, I like to use 2 layers of freezer paper. So I already have my 1 layer that I traced on. Now I take another piece of freezer paper and I just put the 2 together and I iron them together. Okay, so now I take my paper scissors. You don't want to use your good scissors for this, and I just cut my pieces out one at a time. Okay, so now we have our pieces and I'm going to show you how I prep them. I have my yellow, and I'm putting it on my pressing board so that the wrong side is up. Taking my piece of freezer paper and I'm putting it with the shiny side next to the fabric. I'm taking my mini iron and I'm just going to iron it down. Okay. Now I'm going to cut all the way around it, and I'm going to leave a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. So now we're going to clip our inside curves. I'm going to angle my scissors towards the freezer paper and I'm going to make a clip. I'm not going to cut in as far as the freezer paper. I'm going to make my cut 1/8 of an inch away from my freezer paper. And I'm only clipping my inside curves. I never clip an outside curve. Okay, so now we're ready to prep our pieces. So I'm taking some Easy Off starch. I'm going to spray it into a glass jar and let it become a liquid. I have my stiletto and my iron. So I'm just putting some starch on the seam allowance with a paintbrush. And when I start on an inside curve and I just take my finger and I pull the seam allowance towards myself. I pick up my mini iron and I'm just going to, with my stiletto, I'm just going to gently ease the seam allowance towards myself. Turn my piece and I'm going to starch. I like to always pull the seam allowance towards myself. And now I'm just going to finish up at the beginning where I started. And there we go. So the whole piece is prepped. with the seam allowance onto the freezer paper. So now I'm going to show you how to prep a piece that has points on it. So I've done the same thing. I've ironed it onto my fabric. I've cut my 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around it. So I'm going to paint the seam allowance with starch. Okay, when I start at a point, I'm going to score the fabric right at the seam allowance. And I'm going to flip it over, hold on to it with my finger, put my stiletto down, pick up my mini iron, pick up my stiletto in my left hand, and just gently pull that seam allowance towards myself. Okay, so now I'm going to do the other side. So I'm going to put the seam allowance, I'm going to put the starch on the seam allowance. And again, I'm going to score the seam allowance with the tip of the stiletto and fold it over, hold on to it with my finger, pick up the iron and the stiletto, and then just gently pull the seam allowance towards myself. And there we go. Okay, this next piece is a little different because with these two pieces, we covered up the whole entire piece of freezer paper. So that piece is going to be stitched on top of other pieces. Same with this, we're going to stitch all the way around it. With this piece, it's going to go onto our background first, and then other pieces will be put on top of it. So not all of it has to be prepped, but some of it does. We're not going to prep the whole entire piece. We're going to leave everything a raw edge that I have drawn lines on with a pencil. So the top of it doesn't have to be prepped. This little piece down here doesn't have to be prepped, and this piece doesn't have to be prepped. The reason they don't have to be prepped is that they are going to be covered up with another piece. This round piece is actually going to cover up the top of the daffodil. So this top piece doesn't have to be prepped. So you can save yourself a little bit of work. So we are going to prep just these tiny edges right here, just this one. So we're doing the same thing. We're scoring it, we're flipping it over, and just ironing it down. And then this one, we're doing the complete side. So that's all we have to do for that piece. Okay, so now all of our pieces are prepped and we're ready to start some gluing and stitching. So as you can see, I've been busy getting some of this block done. We're going to work on this flower right here. I have traced my design onto my background with a blue water-soluble marker, so I know exactly where my pieces have to go. One of the things you'll notice when you do points is that you get this little tip sticking out. When my pieces are prepped like this, I just leave them sticking out, and I tuck those under as I'm sewing them, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a few minutes. So it does look a little odd, but don't worry about them. I'm going to show you how to deal with those. The first piece that gets put in place is this odd shape that I showed you how to prep. Now I'm going to take my Roxanne's glue, and I'm just going to put 2 dabs of glue on each side, and then I'm going to put it in place. Okay, so there we are in place. So you can see that I've covered up exactly where my blue line shows me to, and I've left these edges raw. Now I can start to put the other pieces in place. So this one will be next. So again, I'm just putting 2 dabs on each side of glue. You can see my raw edge there, so you can see that this piece is now going to cover up that raw edge. Next piece, I put 2 dabs of glue on each side. And And this just tucks right up into there. This piece is going to cover the raw edge right down here at the base of the flower. So I'm going to put it in place, and it's just going to cover up. And my very last piece will cover up that last raw edge. Now I'm going to take the curvy piece that we did, I'm going to put a dab of glue at each outside curve. And I'm going to put it in place, and that will cover up that top raw edge. And last but not least is our little piece of orange that I'm going to put a couple dabs of glue on, and it goes right in there. And there we go, there is our finished daffodil. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch my daffodil in place. The nice thing about this method is everything has been glued in place, and now I can just sit and stitch it. So the order of stitching that I do is the exact opposite of the order that I put it onto the background. This was my last piece that I put down in place, so it's the first piece that I'm going to stitch. So I'm going to stitch around this orange piece, and then I'm going to do the yellow curvy piece. Then I'm going to do my petals, and then my last piece stitched will be this, this odd shaped piece that I just prepped part of it. Okay, so now we're going to do some stitching. So I'm going to be stitching this green leaf right now. So I mentioned before that some of my yellow pieces, because they have points on them, have these points sticking out. So depending on how you press them, they should always be on the same side. So I'm going to start stitching across the top of this so both points are towards me. They're on the bottom side of this leaf. The first thing I'm going to do is scrunch up in my left hand the whole quilt block, and I'm going to take my very first stitch into this point right here. So I'm going to come up through the back, and I'm going to just, the very, very tip of it is where I want to take my very first stitch. And then I go back into the background and just take a tiny piece of my applique fabric. Okay, so I've stitched all the way across, and now I'm ready to tackle this point. So I've stitched up to about 1/2 inch from the point. I'm going to shorten my stitches up while I get to that point. So I just make them a little bit tinier than I normally would. The last stitch I take is in the very tip of the point, at the very end. Now I'm going to turn my piece around, and while I'm doing this, I park my needle over here just so that I don't lose it and I don't cut my thread. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim this little point down a little bit. You don't want to trim it down a lot, but you do want to reduce the size of it. So the first thing I do is I hold my scissors parallel to the fold of this leaf and just trim off about 1/8 of an inch. And just get rid of that little piece. Now I turn it this way, and I'm just going to trim off the very point of the piece I just trimmed. And to do that, I have to sort of put my scissors underneath the point right here so that I can just trim off a little bit of it. So now I'm going to turn it around again towards myself. I'm going to take my needle, scrunch this piece up in my hand again, and I'm going to take my scissors and I'm just going to gently tuck that underneath. And now my little point has disappeared. I'm going to take my thread and I'm going to just give it a little pull so I can pop out any excess fabric. And now I'm just going to start stitching again. And there we go. There we have our point stitched in place. So now we've just finished the second block of Peggy's puzzle. So now you know how to do stems, circles, and stitching. You know how to do curves, points, and layering. So we'll see you next time for the third block of Peggy's puzzle.